Normally, lots of guys that get up here, they talk about preaching, and I like to say that I'm speaking. So I've never claimed to be a preacher. My family thinks otherwise sometimes because I get preachy with them sometimes at home. But if you look at what's on the screen, it was brought up, what should I teach about? What should I speak about? What should I preach about? Whatever it may be. And there was a lot of different ideas that ran through my head. I haven't done this in a long time as far as speaking. And so there's a lot of you I don't know yet. I'm getting to know people better the longer I'm here, and there's a lot of you that don't know me either. So it was, maybe we should do the testimony. And then maybe it was, we need to talk about music. Or, maybe just come up and just do whatever you want to do. And so then I went back and forth on it. And then I decided, and what I came up with is, I've put it all together, Scott. I just decided I'm going to do the testimony. I'm going to let you know about me. I'm going to talk about music. And I've just kind of also made up my own little thing here. So, we're going to be starting with the testimony side of things, okay? And testimony can be an intimidating word for people, okay? Get up and tell your testimony. And so people have to stand up, and not everybody likes to stand up and talk in front of people. I'll talk anywhere. It doesn't matter to me. So, but some people don't like that. And that word also is intimidating as well, testimony, okay? It's a very churchy word. And so I like to change it up. And I say, what's your story? I started this back a long time ago, and I would ask people what their story is instead of what their testimony is. It makes people more comfortable. For the last 6 weeks, I've been introduced into the law enforcement world, and I've carried that question right there with me. Lots of times whenever I walk up on a scene or I get to a call or I'm just simply stopping to talk to somebody to see what's going on, what they're doing, just to get to know them, because I don't know if y'all know this, there's a lot of people that walk around now. A lot of people that ride bikes around now. So I'm getting to know people on this new side of my life in law enforcement. And so most of the time whenever I walk up to a scene or something going on, and I'll go, what's the story here? And the amount of times that people pause and look at me like, that's a strange way to ask, what in the world am I doing? And it's been funny because even my guys that are training me, my FTOs, they're like, I kind of like that. Can I use that? Because some people are talking to you that don't normally talk to us. And I'm like, hey, maybe so. I also had a guy who told me a lot of things and told me to get lost. So it doesn't always work. What's your story? So I'm going to give you a quick rundown of my story. It's not going to take very long for me to go through my testimony or my story. But I'm going to start with this verse. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Now, when I was younger, that verse right there made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Okay? This verse was adopted by my family growing up, and I didn't fully understand it. Now I do. You see, this verse, it's actually not about the warm and the fuzzies. It's kind of the opposite of that. And the reason why is because there's a lot of backstory to it. And the backstory to me starts with, I grew up in church just like this my whole life. I grew up in church. This is what I did. My dad was a pastor from the time I was 6 years old until I was 22 years old. So from 6 years old until I moved out of his house at 18 years old, I was at church all the time, whether I liked it or not. There was not an option. It wasn't something that we discussed. It was just understood I was going to church. I remember growing up, and there wasn't sports like we do now growing up. And if for some reason there was, I didn't get to go. And I absolutely hated my parents for that. I mean, I'm talking, I was angry about it. And now, shame on me, I let my kids do it. So, despite being raised that way, I haven't necessarily followed in every footstep and every lesson that was taught to me. But I grew up in church. Not just my father being a pastor, my mother was also involved in ministry of her own as well outside of our church. My mom was involved in women's ministry on the state level from the age of 13 to 22 as well. And from 2002 to 2006, my mother was the women's state president over all of women's ministry in the state of Oklahoma. And she traveled across the United States as well, speaking and doing women's missions and overseas and traveling and taking groups and doing different things like that. So my family's been very, very much in ministry my entire life. So whenever we talk about stories, what do stories have? Stories have chapters. Stories have verses, if you're talking about a Bible, okay, inside those chapters. So most of the time our stories, and we talk about our testimonies, and some people say, I don't have a very good testimony. I beg to differ. Because there's so many different times in our lives that our stories and our testimonies and our stories, they may not seem like they're important to everybody else, but they created you. They are what made you. That story is you. That's your DNA now. That's what identifies you, good or bad. And so, as I tell you this story, I'm going to tell you it by chapter. That was chapter 1. The next chapter is 1998, Christmas Eve. My mom and dad come home. Been gone for over 2 weeks. To the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. And my Christmas was ruined for many, many years. They came home and they told us that my mother was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And it was a disease that would not be curable. They also stated at that point in time that she was the youngest woman diagnosed at that time with ALS. It's now so big and so strong and so worldwide now. They're a lot younger people now. And I remember on Christmas Eve when they got home, they drove through the night to get there. Show up, and what are me and my sister excited about? Presents, right? We open one gift every Christmas Eve, our entire lives, one gift. We're sitting there waiting. We're like, hey, where's the gifts? We get one, right? We open up these gifts, and there was a whole lot of sentimental value to them. There was a lot of meaning behind them. My sister got this special ring. They got me this special necklace and started talking about the meaning of family and all this stuff. And I mean, they're laying it on thick. And I'm like, man, this is not that great of a Christmas Eve gift here. And then they told us the story. They told us what they had done for the 2 weeks. They told us the story. They told us what the outcome would be. And before we ever even started, they told us what the outcome would be. It would be that it would take her life. It's just a matter of when. So, naturally, despite the fact that up until 1998, I was a golden child in my family, believe it or not. I know my wife made a motion just now when I said that, but it's true. I was a great kid. I was very involved with church. I was very involved with my friends and getting them to church and getting them to knowing Jesus. It was a passion of mine. And I flipped a switch right there because I got so angry with God that I shut him out. Because I didn't know what to do with it. I mean, I'm just a kid. I don't have any idea what to do with this. And so I got so mad. I'm a bit of a mama's boy. So it hit a little different for me. And I got so mad that I just shut out God. I shut out my family. I chose different friends all of a sudden. And I went down different paths. And the main thing that I did, that it wasn't even a bad thing, was I sold my soul to sports. I mean, I'm talking headfirst into working out and playing sports as much as I possibly could. I acquired keys from coaches to gyms and facilities where I could just go do that all the time. And I sold my soul to it. That's what I became. That became my identity, was sports. Baseball, basketball, and football. And that's what I did. And I played some golf here and there. But if you're a baseball player and you like to swing for the fence, swing hard in case you hit it type attitude, playing golf's not always a good thing. Because sometimes you swing and you don't hit the golf ball if you swing hard enough. Sometimes you fall down. Sometimes everybody laughs and it's on video and I'm not showing it. But that's what I did. I sold my soul to sports. I made it my identity. It became who I was. No questions asked. It's who I was. That's what I was known as in the town and the town surrounding that I grew up in. I left high school and was this close to going and playing on the college level. This close. I had several offers in multiple sports. And I couldn't do it. I was going to have to move. And I couldn't leave home. When death is just lingering there for my mom, I couldn't leave home and go do it. So I gave it up. I hung up the cleats. The basketball shoes went away. All dreams of any other sports at the next level left because of fear. And at that moment, I lost my identity. When I lost my identity, fear became a bigger part of my life. And so it made me run faster. It made me run harder away from God. And in doing so, it took me into the workforce because I left high school and my parents didn't let me be a mooch. My dad literally told me, move out, get you a job, see you later. And so I did. And I worked a lot of different jobs. I went from job to job to job. I had no identity. I was just jumping around, job. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't stick with it. And then the next chapter of my life came along by accident. I had no intentions in doing it. I did not want to go. I told my parents I didn't want to go. And I ended up going on this mission trip with my family because of a couple of different reasons. One, we were headed to Italy on a mission trip. And I thought, that's a great place to tell people about Jesus because I love the movie Gladiator. That was my thought. Two, I went to the first meeting and I saw a girl. And it struck my interest in seeing this girl. At that moment in time, she had curly hair. Hasn't been that way since. No, it hasn't. I had to think for a second. It's been a few years. So I decided, all right, I'll go. I'll go on this mission trip. I went on this mission trip, and that mission trip was a turning point in my life. It wasn't the 180 that I needed, but I began to make a turn. That's where I met Sydney. And we went on this mission trip, and the reason of the mission trip was not to go to Italy and witness to a bunch of Italians. I know that sounds, that sounds like a great trip to me. But actually, it was because of 9/11. It was because of all the refugees that were fleeing from all over the place, and they were all fleeing to Italy, to Rome, Italy, because there was so much room, so much space, so many resources in Rome, Italy. So what our mission trip actually was to go to Rome, Italy, and to help and witness and distribute materials and lots of other things, necessities that they need to all these refugees that had fled from their countries because of the war that was going on. And so what we ended up doing was, and I know I'm going to say this, what I did a lot was I played soccer. Now, I have nothing against soccer, so don't get me wrong. I don't know a single thing about it. And I don't know if you can tell by looking at me, I'm not super agile on a soccer field. I don't have tricks. Everything I do is just swing hard in case I hit it. That didn't go over too well with a bunch of young refugee children that had been playing soccer since they came out of the womb. So whenever I came home with lots of bruises and cuts and scrapes all over my knees and legs because I fell a bunch and looked really stupid. And they thought it was hilarious. But my goofiness on the soccer field also opened lots of doors to talk to kids that I probably wouldn't have had if they wanted to play basketball, because I have no mercy when it comes to basketball. I don't care how old you are. You're going down. Isn't that right? Yeah? Isn't that right? See, Reed and Trey decided that last night they wanted to call out Adam and I in a basketball game out in front of the house. They ain't ready. I'll just say that. They ain't ready. They didn't know that the thunder was coming. And we ain't just talking about the playoffs. We come home from this mission trip, and I'm in love. I'm in love. And I know Sydney is head over heels in love, because why wouldn't she be? And she decided, well, she didn't decide, she decided beforehand, but whenever we get back, she's moving on to college. She just graduated high school in 2002, and so she was headed to college, and she was going to the University of Oklahoma. So I knew God was involved. She was going to the University of Oklahoma. And we dated for several months there. And then we went on what I like to call a sabbatical. We took a break, as friends would say. We were on a break. And we took a break for a little while. And I'm not going to tell you my side of the story, because it's irrelevant if I do. And she would absolutely love to stand up and tell you her side of the story, but I'm not going to allow it right now. So, moving on into the story. After we broke up, it was kind of a turn back around, go the other way a little bit. I was in love. I didn't realize how in love I was, but I was. And it broke me a little bit. So I took off. I went to work. I went to work in the oil field, and I left town. I left the state. I was gone a lot. And then I got a phone call from my father after some time of working away. And he said, "Son, you need to come home. It's time for you to come home." I said, "All right, well, I'll see if I can get the weekend off coming up, and I'll come home." So I did. I came home. And whenever I came home, I had realized what that year and a half-ish, what I'd missed. And I'd missed basically the last year and a half of my mother's life. And though I had talked to her on the phone every single day, because I didn't go a day without my mother calling me, period. No questions asked, sometimes multiple times a day, just to make sure I was still alive. And so she could read me scripture, and she could pray for me over the phone, because that's who she was. You see, whenever I was a young kid, lots of kids got grounded, and they got busted, which I did if it was me and my dad. But if it was between me and my mom, you know what I did? I read a chapter or chapters or books in the Bible, and then I had to do book reports on them. That was my punishment from my mother. It's a great idea, Mom. Thanks, Mom. I think we're going to start implementing that. Because the stories that I remember now, and I'm sure a lot of kids don't, I have to say thanks, Mom. I came home. And whenever I came home, I didn't leave again. Called my work, and I said, hey, sorry, I can't leave right now. And whenever I showed up at home the first day, never guess who was sitting in the driveway. She was sitting there because she was coming and visiting my parents. You see, the funny part was she didn't quit coming and visiting my parents, even though we had split up. Because there was a bond and there was a relationship there that was unbreakable despite my stupidity. So she had continued to do this, and she continued to be a part of my mother's process in life. And I'd missed a lot that she saw. I'd missed a lot that she was a part of. And so whenever I came home and I realized what all had happened while I was gone, it clicked in my head, and God said, hey, stupid, she's still here waiting on you. She's right here waiting on you. And I never looked back after that. I decided that it was time to get serious about things. So we dated for a little bit there, and I knew at that moment, it was time for us to get serious. I'm going to go back to college. She's in college. I'm going to start school. I don't have much time. I got to get enrolled right away. I'm going to move to Oklahoma City. I'm going to go to school, and then on weekends, we're going to come home to my mom and dad's house because we're going to stay together. We're going to date. Everything's good. Everything's great. I get my first semester into college, and I'm killing it. And I hadn't been in school since high school. I'm killing it. I did a phenomenal job. I'm just not trying to brag, but my first semester in college, I was on the ball. Fired up for God, fired up for my relationship with my wife. I'm clicking on all cylinders. I decide, despite her knowledge, I decided there's no sense in waiting on this. I know who she is. She knows who I am. I'm going to prove how serious I am. I'm going to ask her to marry me. And so the idea was, let's get to Christmas, and I'll ask her on Christmas. And I thought, that's cheesy, that's lame. Lots of people do that. So I'm going to just surprise her before Christmas, the week before. So I did. I surprised her the week before. I bought her a puppy. I'm a dog person. So is she. I had a chocolate lab, so I thought I'm going to buy her a little lab. And I bought her a lab, and it was solid white. It was way too much money for me to spend at that point in time in my life, along with a ring. So needless to say, I owed my dad a lot of money. I bought this dog, and I gave her this dog, and I named it, those little engraving tags that you can get at Walmart. I went to Walmart, 24-hour Walmart, Oklahoma City. I survived. I'm here telling about it. It was late at night. Buy this tag. I named the dog on the tag. So she thought. I come in. She has to close her eyes. Keep your eyes closed, blah, blah, blah. And I play it up big. I give her Skittles first. And I just set them in her hand. If you ever want to buy her candy, that's her favorite, Skittles. Then I bought her a case of Coke Zero, and I brought it in. I set it in her hands. And she just keeps looking at me every time I bring something to her as a gift. Of course, nothing's wrapped. I'm not that guy. So and she just kind of looking at me like, thanks. And I'm like, Merry Christmas, giving you your gifts early, I'm excited. And I said, all right, close your gift. Close your eyes. I got one more gift for you. And I bring it in, this little puppy. Thank goodness it was quiet. And I just sat it in her hands, and she still had her eyes closed. She starts shaking. She can feel it's a dog. She's so excited. And she opened her eyes, and there's this little puppy sitting there. And, she was adorable. She was the cutest little puppy. And I said, look what I named it. And she starts digging around on the collar, and while she did, I took a knee. And she looked at that tag, and the tag actually said, will you marry me? And so she looks up, and she has no idea this is going on. I'd already met with her father. He had already told me, yeah, I'll kill you if you screw it up. That's his words, literally. And she said yes. I don't know if y'all know or not. She said yes. And immediately we began to talk. as we were heading to my family's for Christmas, we began to talk. We're like, hey, we got to do this quick because I want my mom to be there, and so did Sydney. And so we decided we're going to do a spring break wedding while we're in college still, like a couple dummies. And we're going to embark on this journey together, broke and poor. Neither one of us have good jobs, but we didn't care. We were in love, and we wanted to make sure we had this done in time. And so that was the plan. We told my parents that. That was the plan. That's what we're going to do. And whenever that happened, the next week after Christmas, my mother goes into the hospital, and she never left. So for 2 weeks, she was in the hospital. They ended up going in and trying to put a port in for her, and she was too weak to recover from that. Her lungs weren't strong enough, and she got real bad pneumonia from it, and she never went home. And the pneumonia is actually what ended up taking her life because she couldn't keep up anymore. Her muscles didn't have the strength, and she passed away on January 12th of 2006. The night before she died, she actually told my wife, though, fiance at the time, she said, I don't care what you do. Do not change that wedding date. Because if you do and you give him time, you'll lose him. I don't know if she was right or not because I didn't get an option to change the date. So we went ahead and got married on spring break of 2006. And the rest was history. That was an important part of my story. That was a life-changing moment in my story. Because at that moment in my story, what you would think would be devastating and life-crushing was actually the opposite. Because life actually began to make a lot of sense because my memories of my mother weren't of her sickness. You see, I didn't think about those things. No, I thought about the thousands and thousands of letters and cards and calls that came to our family when she passed away of people from all over the world talking about the impact that she had made on their lives. People I had no idea who they were. I still don't know who they are. And for whatever reason, that just clicked in my mind. I've got to do something. I have to do something with my life. I've got to give back to God everything that He's been given to me my whole life that I've been ignoring and that I've missed out on. It's time for me to pick up where she left off. That was my mentality. And so I did. I went into ministry. That was the next chapter in my life. I went into ministry. I became a youth minister in Edmond, Oklahoma. Had no idea what I was doing. Sydney didn't have any idea what she was doing. And everything was extremely successful because all we did was rely on God because we had no knowledge, no experience other than just growing up in church. And God showed so much to us and gave us so much growth in our relationship and with Him and with that church. And then what do you know? 3 years after being married, Sydney comes up pregnant. And we decide we're going to move back to Tahlequah, where Sydney's from. And 9 months later, here came our 14-year-old now, Reed. And he has been such a blessing. We love him so much. No reason. I love you, son. But my problem was I came back here and I didn't continue on ministry. I just went to work. Got a job. Then I moved to another job. Then I moved to another job. And I remember whenever I left a certain job, I was talking to my brother-in-law, Kyle Roselle, and I asked him, I said, I'm just not happy with what I'm doing. And he looked at me and he said, who is happy with what they're doing all the time? A job's a job. You just do your job and then you go home and live your life. I thought, that's not bad advice, I don't think. I think that's pretty good advice. He said, so you're going to this next job right here. He said, you know what? Do your best to last 10 years. He said, and once you get to 10 years, if you're not happy then, do something else then. But give it a shot. Build something. Create something. So I did. And I went to work. I didn't always like it. There was lots of times I hated my job. There was lots of times I was sick of my job. But I just kept going and I kept going, I kept going. And that just kept echoing in my mind over and over every time I wanted to do something different. And I stuck it out for 10 years. And guess what happened on that 10th year? My brother-in-law, Kyle Roselle, started the next chapter in my life when he got sick with cancer. See, for 10 years, we just kind of lived life. I did music here and there at this church, that church, this church, that church. And we just kind of lived life, Sydney and I. We got busy. Our boys got involved in sports. We had another kid, Axel. And, I mean, we were just busy with work and sports and life. And we weren't consistent with church. And we weren't consistent with our relationship with God and keeping God the center of our relationship. And so we just let busy take over for our lives and made it an excuse. And little did we know through all of this that the person that we thought was the wild child, Kyle, who was the say it like it is, tell you how it is, I mean, you knew where you stood with him. No questions asked. Never would have guessed that he would teach us more about what we need to do with our lives in a short, less than 2-year span. You see, he died in January of 2022. The day that he died, we discover all these different little trails of information that he had for us. And finally, Sydney herself found what he did the day after he was diagnosed with cancer. He recorded his own eulogy on horseback. The day after he was diagnosed with cancer. Because guess what? He knew he couldn't beat it. Because nobody has. It was round 2 in my life. And what he began to talk about in that eulogy, the things that he began to say, if God brings me through this, I win. If He doesn't, I win. It's a win-win situation. Life or death doesn't matter for me because I know where I'm going. I win. So now our family, that's a big saying for us. It's a win-win situation. We live our life in a way now that it doesn't matter what happens to us. If I get sick next week and I die, guess what? I win. If I get to live till I'm 80 and I get to watch my kids grow up and I get to see grandkids and I get to witness and I get to share my music and I get to be a part of this community, guess what? I win. It's a win-win situation. So since it was a win-win situation, what he told us in his eulogy was, do more than what you're doing right now. It doesn't matter what you're doing now, do more because you won't regret it. He said his number one regret in his life was not the fact that he didn't work enough. His number one regret in his life was that he didn't do more for God. That's what he said. He said, at the end of my life, I didn't sit there and think, man, I wish I would have sold a few more cows. I wish I would have gone on a few more vacations. No, instead, he laid there with his family surrounding him and him telling us, do more for the Lord because you'll regret it if you don't. So that's where our lives are now. Our lives have changed a lot in the last couple of years. That's why I'm here. I had a pastor of First Baptist Church come to me shortly after Kyle passed, and he asked me if I would come to their church. They wanted to start another service, and they wanted me to help with starting a contemporary style worship service. I agreed to it, and for a year, that's what I did. And for a year, I argued with Adam that I was not going to come to Keys Baptist Church. I was now 12 years into my job, and I was arguing with my wife, even though I was angry a lot, even though I was stressed to the max. It was changing who I was, and she was telling me, you need to do something different. Kyle's gone. You did 10 years. Do something different now. And I ignored it. I ignored Adam. I ignored my wife. I was wrong. I'm here. At 40 years old, I became a cop. Because that's what God said I can do more at. So I am. And it's funny because I'm catching some flack here and there because I'm not a big ticket rider. Some of us are thankful for that in this room. But I'm not a big ticket rider. I actually got in trouble for it already in 6 weeks' time. My point in my job, and this is what I told them whenever I got in trouble, and this is also whatever I tell people whenever I pull them over. I'm not out to get you. I'm out to help you. That's my goal as a police officer. I'm not out to make people miserable. I'm not out to try to ruin everybody's lives. Now, are some of you in this community going to deserve some citations from time to time? Yes, you are. And I know where my standards are. But I'm also here to help. I'm not just going to write a ticket for every little thing. And if that's what's wanted of me, I'll go somewhere else. You see, I feel like in this line of work, I can do more than I've ever done before. With the people I work with the people in the community. You know what my favorite thing to do? Is a pedestrian stop. They want you to do 5 a shift. They want you to stop and talk to 5 people a shift. I do 15. It's my favorite thing to do. Because I like to talk, so I'll just stop. I'll get out of my car, turn on my camera so they can see what I'm saying, what I'm doing, and I talk to people. And you know what I ask them? What's your story? What's going on? How long you lived here? And I get to know them. And they may be the scum of the earth. You know what happens next time I see them? I get a wave instead of a middle finger. Which a lot of cops get from the same guys. Do more. Because you win no matter what. So as I read Jeremiah 29:11 years ago, I didn't realize why my mom chose that verse. But you see, I'll just tell you the backstory of it real quick. They'd gone to the promised land, right? Israel's in the promised land, and they show up, and they're supposed to make a difference. They're supposed to do more. They're supposed to help people change from their ways. And they don't. Instead, they conform to them. So what does God do? Exiles them. Sends them to Babylon. And they're in Babylon, and guess what they hear all the time? Lies. False propheting. The false prophets are astronomical. And guess what they do? They believe them all. God sends so many different people to talk to them and to tell them, hey, listen, you're doing this wrong. No, don't listen to that. That's not true. This is what you need to listen to. And they ignore Him, and they ignore, and they ignore, and they ignore. And I know none of us ignore God. Nobody here does. You see, the first part of that verse in Jeremiah 29 says, for I know the plans I have for you. And a lot of us want to grab a hold of that and say, God's got a plan for me. But guess what the plan was for them? 70 years in exile. The plan for them was punishment, not reward. So we want to grab a hold of that first line and say, for I know the plans I have for you. And we're like, yes, God has a plan for me. But guess what it was about in this verse? It was about a punishment for 70 years. And he says this, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. But first, you've got to serve here. First, you have to pray for these people while you are in captivity, while you are being exiled. 70 years. False prophets told him it's just going to be 2 years. God said, that's a lie. The beautiful thing about verse 11 is that there's another verse. So that's the only verse we ever see on t-shirts. It's the only verse we ever see anywhere. Cards, posters, whatever. I guess it's not posters anymore. I apologize for that statement. That's my age, my era. But there's another verse coming. Because see, we can get hung up on 11 if we know the true meaning of 11. If we go back in time and we see what led up to verse 11, and we see that this is God talking about, this is the punishment. I do have a plan for you. But it's after you have lived through this 70 years. And he says this in verse 12. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. As you bow your heads this morning, it's my prayer for this church, for myself, for my family, for my friends, that we don't get too caught up in the fact that we want life to be easy. Because that may not always be the way things are going to go. Lots of times we pray and we ask for healing. We ask for miracles. And God says, I've got a plan for you. But healing may not be here. Healing may be on the other side. That doesn't mean it's not a good plan. It doesn't mean that we are not capable of hope for a future. It just means we have to realize God's plan is not our plan. God, I thank you for today. I thank you for this church. God, I pray that my life is a reflection of me doing more. God, I pray that I live my life in a way that I win no matter what happens. Father, I pray that you are glorified in my life, in my story. God, I pray that as a church, that our story is with you right smack dab in the center of it. God, you sent your Son. You sent your Son to die on a cross for me. A middle-aged cop, worship leader, living in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. But I was enough. God, I pray that we keep that focus. Father, I pray that as it says in verse 12, that we call upon you. That we pray to you because you will hear us. I pray that we seek you because we will find you. I pray that we long to learn something completely new about you. That we dig deep enough into your word and into your message, Father, that we learn new things about you every time that makes our story even better. Father, shape us, mold us. Make us into people that do more. It's in your Son's precious and holy name that I pray. Amen.